Good morning, everyone. We are a small group this morning, which is great. So if folks are comfortable, feel free to unmute at any point and jump in to ask questions, add thoughts. We'll try and make it a little bit more interactive this morning, which is great. Just to kick off, why don't we do some introductions? Bree already did a great job introducing yourself in the first session. Thank you for moderating this discussion this morning. My name is Deb Bolton. I'm currently the Chief Operating Officer at Renaissance Life Brands, as well as I run a consulting business on the side. So I wear a few different hats across those roles. Renaissance Life Brands is a collection of companies focused on increasing access to patients for psychedelic enhanced psychotherapy. My work with that group is focused primarily on building and scaling an institute for training healthcare professionals on how to approach delivering psychedelic enhanced psychotherapy. My consulting business is a range of topics. Some work I do is on leadership, seminars, on board meeting communications, go-to-market strategy in different regions around the globe. So it's a little bit about me. If folks feel comfortable, feel free to unmute and pop in and just share out where you're joining from this morning. If there's any particular negotiations that you're interested in hearing about, I'm happy to incorporate that into the discussion today. Everyone's feeling a little quiet. Oh, hello. um, okay, well, why don't I'll keep rolling through and like I said, feel free to jump in. So over the course of my career, I've had the opportunity to work in a number of different places. I've held sales roles. I've worked in a couple of advertising agencies. I've worked in digital marketing. I've worked in operations. And there's a couple of things that have always been interesting to me about the topic of knowing your worth in both those situations, professionally as well as personally. I think it's an awesome topic. How do you know what your worth is when we're thinking about negotiating a salary, or whether we apply to the job, whether we feel like we're worthy of applying, or we're looking for promotions, or we're looking for a special project or volunteer work. So it kind of comes up really all over our professional careers as well as our personal spaces. How do we establish boundaries for ourselves? When do we say no? When do we say yes? So one of the things that I did when Brianna and the team asked me to join on this session was I talked to a number of folks about this topic. And one of the things that I thought would be really interesting today to focus on is knowing your worth about knowing your worth, or is it about deciding your worth? And your worth is sort of a lifelong conversation that you're going to have with yourself. I think that was one of the really cool things when I was talking to a number of friends and colleagues about this is, I think for me anyways, I have the same questions about my worth now as I did 20 years ago when I was starting my career. It's just a different conversation and a different set of circumstances. So this is, I think, really a lifelong journey at how do you continue to know or decide your worth. And then just a quick shout out. I couldn't attribute this fun little quote to anyone specifically. So if we find out who said it, then I'll update this. But I saw this while I was thinking about putting this presentation together. Don't let anyone treat you like free salsa, you are guacamole. And I just thought that was awesome. Just to jump in again, any specific types of negotiations or value conversations that anyone would like to focus on today? Otherwise, I'll talk about a few of the more common ones. Just drop them in the chat as we go. All right, let me just One of the interesting things about thinking about worth is that fashion gives us a number of really great examples to play off of. So one of the things that I think is really interesting about the idea of deciding or defining or understanding worth is the white t-shirt. If we take this in terms of fashion, you can buy a white t-shirt. In this case, one of them is a $10 t-shirt, one of them is a $350 t-shirt. They're both organic cotton, and they're both crew neck standard white t-shirts. And this I think is actually a really cool conversation. Is you likely everybody owns at least one white t-shirt. Depending on how many times you've washed it, you may own 4 or 5 white t-shirts. How did you choose which t-shirt to buy? How did you choose what price point to pay for the white t-shirt? Was it based on your budget? Was it based on the material? Was it based on the ethical practices of the company that's making the t-shirt? Was it the texture? Was it the fit? Was it timing? You know, were you on your way to work, you spilt your coffee and you needed to grab a t-shirt and the white one was right there, and that was how it happened. But we all really have the opportunity to choose from a $10 t-shirt to a $350 t-shirt. How do we make those choices? Thoughts, comments? Anyone have a specific strategy for how they determine the price of what they will pay for a white t-shirt?
If it's on sale.
It's sorry?
I was saying if it's on
On
sale,
sale?
I would probably consider it more.
Yeah. But then which is really neat, right? So then is it the amount of discount that you got? So would you buy a more expensive t-shirt if you got a bigger discount on it? I think that's interesting as well. Um,
How
the other one
soft
that, oh, sorry, go ahead.
how soft it is.
Oh, 100%. I'm with you. I'm a texture person. I'm
Mhm.
actually obsessed with bamboo based clothes. They're so soft. Um, but yeah, but again, you can get a bamboo t-shirt for like $20. You can get a bamboo t-shirt for $200.
Wow.
That's crazy. So in these cases, the fashion companies are deciding what their worth is going to be. There's many examples here. One of the ones that I think is really neat uh, is Balenciaga in 2017 launched a new product, which was the blue bag on the right for over $2,000. And they immediately got called out for essentially offering the $2,000 version of the IKEA bag that everyone probably has owned at some point. The designer, to be fair, the designer Balenciaga is known for really trying to challenge what society's accepted standards of luxury are. So some of this may have been a little tongue in cheek. It wasn't the first sort of approach that the designer had taken, but this in 2017 got a ton of press, a ton of coverage, and the interesting thing about this is that IKEA's response, I thought, was equally as interesting. They didn't defend it, they didn't call out Balenciaga negatively for it. What they did is they said thank you for admiring our product, and then they ran a set of videos on how to tell if your big blue bag is an original IKEA, which is amazing. Um, does your bag rustle when you move it? Because the Balenciaga one is leather. Would you carry anything in this bag? Hockey equipment, bricks, laundry. Um, could you throw this bag in the dirt and then hose it off with a garden hose and have it look amazing? Back to new. Can you fold it up to be a super small purse size square if you are practiced in the art of folding those IKEA bags and shoving them in your closet? And is it 99 cents? And does it have an original IKEA brand label on it? Which I thought was amazing, right? Is the IKEA's mission is to bring value at reasonable prices, and we can argue the pros and cons of whether they do that, but their corporate identity is around how do we bring valuable furniture to help people create the homes that they want at prices that are reasonable. And so in the spirit of what was important to them as a company, they really responded in what I thought was an amazing way. And super funny. So I respect the funny responses. I think that you can still see their video response. So I'll try and find the YouTube link if anyone's interested in seeing it, because it's pretty good. But I thought these two were really great examples of us, for us to sort of contemplate is, how did the IKEA team set the 99-cent price? How did the Balenciaga team set $2,145? Why would the value of the bag be $2,000? Is it the type of leather? Is it because people would get a kick out of thinking it was funny that they copied the IKEA bag? Is it a type of person that would see this as funny, or is this a serious fashion shopper who thinks that it's just awesome? Or is it someone who just will buy anything that Balenciaga does? So if we think about what does that mean for ourselves, right? Are we asking to have our worth defined? Are we feeling worthy enough? Are we setting prices, right? Are we deciding we're a $25 t-shirt? Are we deciding we're a $100 t-shirt? How do we feel versus, and what are we thinking in the circumstances we're in? I've got one more example, and then I think there's a couple of good questions around negotiating jobs, promotions, and pay. So I'll go through one more example, and then let's maybe get into some of those situations. The next one is a really, really fascinating woman. So for anyone who's not familiar with her, her name is Allyson Felix. She's one of the most decorated runners in the world. In 2017 or 2018, she was 32. She was a 6-time Olympic gold medalist. She was an 11-time world champion. And she had decided that she also wanted to be a mother. She was also in the middle of renegotiating her sponsorship contract with Nike, which at the time was very lucrative. And they declined her request to accommodate lower performance around the time of her childbirth. And they offered to extend her contract at a 70% pay reduction. So there's lots of different things we could tackle with that situation. But focusing on the value and your worth piece, I guess this wasn't the first time that something had happened like this to female athletes at Nike. And she wrote an op-ed with the New York Times on it. And within 6 or so months of her writing the op-ed, Nike had completely changed their policy on maternity leave. They switched it to an 18-month protected pay zone, and they had essentially sort of delivered what she had been asking for. But she also went out and started her own brand and runs her own business and is doing her thing and is still running. And obviously her daughter's a big fan based on the picture. But that's a really, I thought, great example of negotiating what is historically feels like a point where you don't have leverage, right? So how did she approach being pregnant? She's not going to have this baby. Most humans are not going to have a baby 4 weeks later, run an event and be in a physical spot to be at the same place you were before you were expecting. And she's negotiating a lucrative contract. Frankly, I don't know that in that case I would have had the confidence to call the New York Times and get an op-ed on it. I think that's incredibly brave, but because she decided that her worth did not need to be determined by the parental leave policies at the company that she was negotiating with, she was able to not only change her situation, but to change the situation of all of the women athletes that were sponsored by this company. And what an amazing outcome. And so certainly, we're not always in those types of positions, but sometimes we are. Sometimes when we think about our own worth and we stand up for our worth, or we negotiate our worth, we actually are impacting what happens for others around us, and what's fair, or what's reasonable, or what's an opportunity, or what's available or accessible to everyone. So I'll pause there for a second. Any questions or comments about some of these examples? Cool. All right, so let's jump into the idea of how do you negotiate salary? How do you negotiate a job offer? How do you negotiate for a promotion, or to get work on a special project, or adjust your salary without a promotion? I think was one of the questions that came up, which is a really good, that's a really juicy example to get into. So Bria, I'm going to lose track of time in this conversation, so I'm going to task you with keeping me honest and giving me a 5 to 10 minute warning.
For sure.
So the first is, spoiler alert, there is no right way to do this. I don't know that in many cases there's even a right answer. One of the things that is, I think, a really interesting way that I've worked to reframe how I think about these situations is to shift from thinking about what is it that I should do, or what is the right way to do this, or how do I get $5,000 more, or how do I get another couple of days of vacation, or how do I get this job, to who do I want to be. I've worked with professional coach for a while, and credit to her, she started me on this journey of thinking about worth in a different way. And I used to rebel about this all the time. I would say, Sarah, what am I supposed to do? I've got a job offer here. I like this part. I don't like this part. What am I supposed to do? And I realized that was a pattern. I've often thought about, what is it that I am supposed to do in a situation? Do I apply? Do I not apply? Do I counter? There's a million ways we can obsess about the job application and acceptance process. But taking a step back and thinking about who is it that we want to be changes the way that we think about our value, our worth, and what we're negotiating for. So what's important to us right now? And the important thing is right now or short term, right? So our values are likely probably longer term, what's important to us from a value perspective. But there are a lot of things that are more transient. So is what is important to us right now getting broad experience because we're not sure where we want to land in our career? Is what's important to us health benefits, and we need to be full-time somewhere in a job that we don't hate to get it? Is what's important to us learning a particular skill? So who do we want to be is really thinking about what's important from a values perspective, from a learning perspective, from a life perspective, and how does that change how we think about the negotiation that we're getting into? There's a ton of different ways to navigate through your career, and they're not generally linear. and they're not generally planned out, unless you literally go to medical school, you go to law school, you have to go through training, and there's more of a prescribed career path. How do you negotiate each individual decision you make throughout your career, is very complicated. It's messy, it's confusing. You often don't have enough information to really know, especially if we're looking at full-time work. The interview process is a lot like dating and getting married after 3 dates. Do you really know what you're getting into? Do you really know whether they clean their dishes right away or don't? Do you really know if the toilet paper roll is going over or under? It's really hard to make those choices after 3 interviews. So all you can do is your best. And I think that's the most important thing to think about is for me in these situations, who I want to be is in alignment with my values. I want to be working on things that I can feel good about. I want to be learning. So am I learning something new when I'm saying yes, or negotiating this? And how much is that a part of it? How much is that worth to me? And I also, want to be okay with whatever choice I make, or whatever the consequences are. So I think that's really important too, is if we're in a situation where I think asking for a raise in a current job without a promotion is a good one. So if I feel like I want to ask for $5,000 more, say, on my current salary, regardless of how I decide to go after it, am I okay if it doesn't happen? What would it mean if the employer said no? Or what would it mean if they said yes? So that's a really interesting question too. I've switched jobs, industries, and companies all at the same time and taken a pay cut. Because for me at that time, although I certainly would have loved to have that the same or more money, what was most important to me and who I wanted to be was the learning. I wanted to learn something new. I wanted to be in a different space. I wanted to experience a different industry. And so for me, that I was okay with the compensation being less than what I had been getting, because the compensation wasn't like the environment wasn't what I wanted to be. I wasn't showing up as my best self. It wasn't the place that I felt comfortable in. I felt compromised by some of the behavior, of folks in the office, and I wasn't showing up as who I wanted to be. And so in one case, I took a pay cut to be in a place that I felt would be more in line with my values. And that ended up being a fantastic decision, because that company got bought by another company, which got bought by another company, which turned into a completely different career path.
Deb, I think that's an interesting point, because a lot of us are working at startups or small companies. So I guess, how did you weigh the taking a pay cut versus the learning? Especially, I don't think you were necessarily in the beginning of your career then. Do you have any advice for people who are in the beginning?
This is a great question. I actually still work through this now. I think this is something that I thought about at the beginning of my career, but I mean, to be honest, the first job I got out of college, I didn't negotiate anything, because I was so happy that someone had offered me a job. So I just said yes to whatever they offered, which remind me to come back to that point a little bit later. But it's a tough balance. I run a consulting business, and that's new for me. And I ask myself those questions all the time. For a project, I set an hourly rate, and inevitably clients would like work for less, and I would like to work for more. I would say the net of what I said when no one could hear was that it depends on who you want to be and whether you're going to be okay with it. So if you get offered something and you don't think that it aligns with your values and you don't feel like it hits any of the boxes that you're going to tick, and you decide to take it, then you have to be connected to a reason for that. And it could be just life, right? Like it could be like, I have bills to pay, and so this isn't what I want, this isn't necessarily the next step I wanted to take, but this is my option right now. And I think in those cases, a lot of us can be in those situations at various points of our career. There's always something interesting about work you can take on. And so if it's not what you want, but you feel like you're in a place where, this is the best deal you're going to be able to get in this moment, looking for ways to create more of what you want once you get in is an interesting spot to be. The one thing that I want to just circle back to, Bree, that I think is really important is what I said about my first job, and that I said yes, did not negotiate a single thing, and took it because I was so happy to have a job offer. And I was just finishing college, and my parents were also happy that I would not be living on their couch. And what I didn't know until I became a people manager later in my career is that in almost every case, employers offer you roles that are not at the maximum budget they have available to spend. And I didn't realize this until I became a hiring manager. And what was super fascinating to me is I ended up hiring a ton of people, probably 100 people over a couple of years, and doing promotions. And I would say 85% of the men that I interviewed negotiated their salary. And I would say less than 20% of the women that I interviewed negotiated their salary. So there's always room to ask. And I think this goes for your current job as well, because I know that had come up as a question. But if you're applying to a net new job or even a promotion within your same environment, the offer that someone gives you is usually not their maximum available offer. In some cases it can be, but it's usually not. There's usually room. It might only be $500, it might be $750, it might be $2,000, it might be $5,000, but there's usually room to move up whatever the first offer is that's given you. And so over your career, if it's $2,000 every time you accept a new job, it adds up considerably over a 20-year career. So I would definitely say in a new job, feel comfortable making asks, whether it's a work from home ask or a healthcare benefits ask or an education benefits ask. A lot of companies have it and don't offer it and will make it available to you. So they would cover investing in you for a course. But almost always ask on salary, and if you're reasonable with it, like don't ask for 25% more than what they've offered you. Their budget's probably not going to have that much cushion. But ask, right? The worst thing that they're going to say is we can't, you're at our max offer. But it's not necessarily a negative thing, because whatever job you end up in, you're probably negotiating something on behalf of the company you're working with. So if you're able to negotiate on behalf of yourself, you're probably going to be successful as an employee negotiating for that company in different situations. And in terms of being in a role and looking for a salary bump without a promotion, what can be really helpful in that case is to take a look at what was your experience and background when you started the role. What is your experience and background now that you've been in the role for a while? Have your accountabilities in the role changed? That happens a lot. You start in a role and then all of a sudden the role is significantly different than what it was, a year or two before. So that's some good thinking to do, and reflecting on, if I was applying to this job now with this level of experience, what would I put my value at? And it's also worth looking at other roles within the company or other roles in the industry and thinking about, if I took this job somewhere else, what would the pay difference be? And then I think going back to the values, right? So what am I able to access or grow with or feel good about in this role? And is it offset about the money? Or if it's really a money thing, then can I live without it? Or can I negotiate it? Or can I leave? So it's just being really clear about what are the most important things for you at this point? What are the options that you're looking at? And what can you be okay with? And you don't have to be okay with staying. So if someone says no, and the money was really a proxy for respect or your time, or quality, you don't have to stay. But I think sort of really understanding, if the answer is no, are you prepared to leave before you have those conversations is helpful to do. It just provides you, I think, a clearer view of how you want to respond in those conversations and who you want to be in that conversation. One last thing, and I put it on this slide so I wouldn't forget, is the idea of a personal board of directors is really neat. So a friend of mine years ago started doing this, and I kind of laughed a little bit. I was like, what did you do? And but he put together a personal board of directors. So it's just 4 or 5 people maybe that know him pretty well, that have completely different experiences and perspectives. So it's not people necessarily in his industry or colleagues. It's definitely a mixed bag of people who would look at a situation very differently. And so what he does is when he's thinking about negotiations or job moves or professional asks and growth, is he rounds up his personal board of directors, and sometimes he has one-on-one conversations with them, and sometimes he has like with a small group, and talks through the pros and cons of things. And they're a group of people who he feels will challenge him on who he wants to be and what's important, and does this align with his values, and how comfortable is he going to be, and is it a growth move, or so it's a really neat concept that I've adopted as well. And I think what's really nice is finding a group of people that you can listen to, that will challenge your thinking, that will ask you great questions, and also support you no matter what decision you make. So in this case for me, it's not always you're my best friend. It's not always a parent. It's not always someone who's going to feel really personally connected and invested and upset if I don't choose, what they thought. But it's a really neat opportunity to not feel as alone while you're making sometimes really big choices. And trying to get a group of people who will think about it differently, who will challenge you, who will see things that you're not seeing, and help you think about, what is it that you want to be? How do you want to approach this conversation? Think through what kind of responses or dialogue you want to have, if you're challenged back. So highly recommend the idea of a personal board of directors. They're also great just for general sanity checks on professional activities. And certainly the office has become virtual, but no less interesting in the last few years. So the personal board of directors can be really helpful if you're challenged with a boss or with a colleague, or that kind of thing, and help you think about, looking at stuff from a different perspective.
Thank you so much, Deb. We are at time. I do have one quick question follow up on that though. Do they know they're on their personal board of directors, or do they? Yeah, they do.
Yeah.
You have asked them?
Yeah, in this case, like it's kind of a tongue-in-cheek thing. And yeah, and it's been a neat way to also see how many other people have started to do their own personal board of directors when you start talking to them about it, because it's kind of a funny concept. And it's a little bit like asking for mentorship, but but you're sort of bringing the diverse perspectives together. So yeah, I would definitely consider labeling them the personal board of directors, because I think it's just fun. I get a kick out of it.
Super
people-
fun. Well, Deb, I can't express how much we're grateful for you talking today. We have about 8 minutes until the next session, so feel free to take a break. We love it if you join another session in 10 minutes. And thank you.